I have discussed meat diets elsewhere and the impacts of various uh, meats, beef, lamb, chicken, etc., versus uh, uh, plant-based diets. But obviously, it's not always that simple. As we had seen, a person who is riding a bicycle but eating a lot of meat can have a much bigger carbon footprint than someone who's maybe even driving an SUV but very mindful of eating plant-based diet or plant-based foods. Especially when it comes to comparing the global north versus global south. The global north consumes more meat than they should, even from their personal health point of view. So there is the environmental impact, and then there is the personal health impact of meat consumption, especially red meat, which is not good for health. And then there is the economically developing global south, which is consuming more and more meat. And in the global south, there are issues of socioeconomics, livelihoods, and so on associated with producing meat diets, and also nutritional requirements that sometimes require meat consumption. So how do you deal with these contrasts in this context of climate change? That's kind of an issue that this review paper discusses. It has a lot of discussions also on the animal ethics and impacts on poor people, better productions of food, and so on. I'm just going to read the abstract and then summarize a few of the results here. Meat has become a controversial topic in public debates as it involves multiple sustainability dimensions, which we have looked at, emissions, for example, and there are also papers which show how the cost of meat doesn't include the environmental impacts, right? That's obvious. Here we review global meat consumption trends and the various sustainability dimensions involved, including economic, social, environmental, health, and animal welfare issues. Meat has much larger environmental and climate footprints than plant-based foods, which is very obvious, and can also be associated with negative health effects, as I just said. Technological options can help to increase the sustainability of meat production, but changes in consumption are required as well. At least in high-income countries where people consume a lot of meat on average, notable reductions will be important. How to bring about behavioral change are completely something else. However, vegetarian lifestyle for all would not necessarily be the best option. Especially in low-income countries, nutritious plant-based foods are not available and are or affordable year-round. Also, livestock production is an important source of income for many poor households. More research is needed on how to promote technological and behavioral changes while managing sustainability trade-offs of meat-based diets. Okay, so just to jump into some numbers, this is global meat consumption, total annual consumption by region. So here it's in millions of tons from the 1960s to where the data is available 2018. So North America has consumed slightly increasing amounts, but their amount were already beginning at a higher level. Oceania, on the other hand, has remained low here. Europe higher than North America. Latin America has increased over time, and Asia has become now the monster consumer of meat over time. And Africa, sorry, I think this is Africa, not Oceania. Oceania is here, which is small population and negligible numbers. If you look at the type of meat in millions of tons, mutton and goat have gone up, but not as much. Other, which include all kinds of non-major meats. So poultry has gone up. In fact, there is some idea that if there was if we disappeared right now and somebody from outside came and dug around, they would think there was a mass extinction of chicken, because there is so many chicken consumed and the bones are just lying around in the ground somewhere, right? Pork has gone up and is now falling a little bit below the poultry, and bovine also has, of course, gone up, and this tends to be the most heavy in terms of environmental impacts, land use, land change impacts, water use, and so on. Per capita annual consumption in kilograms, North America, as I said, has been high and has gone up a little, but immigration is involved there as well. Oceania has remained high, even though it's numbers here, total consumption remains small compared to others. Europe has plateaued. Latin America has gone up. World average has gone up as well. Asia, as we said, is gone up, and Africa mostly remains poor, and it consumes a lot of the so-called other meats, which may include also bushmeat and so on here. Okay, if you look at the development of per capita meat consumption and gross domestic product over time for 1990 to 2027, so this is in GDP per capita dollars and annual per capita meat consumption, you can see that the consumption in India has not gone up as much with the increase in GDP. Similarly for Ethiopia, but Ghana shows some trends there. Indonesia, it's some dips there which may be related to things like the financial crisis and so on. China shows the most strongest correlation between per capita income and annual per capita meat consumption. And similarly, the numbers hold for the world as a whole. South Africa is here. Brazil shows much more per capita meat consumption than increase in GDP per capita. So there is a jump in GDP of a little bit, but the meat consumption has gone up much more. And US has a complicated relation with the financial incomes of families as well, and Israel is up here, Canada has gone down, Switzerland, Norway, South Korea shows a remarkable increase over time, and so does Japan. So in general, increased income does lead to annual per capita meat consumption going up, and this is true for China and India, even though India here hasn't shown up. But as the middle class grows, the meat consumption goes, so does the fish, but food wastage goes up as well. So all these things have to be kept in mind. Meat production by region and production intensity in millions of tons. Production volumes measured in terms of protein, which is what people mostly consume meat for, but once it becomes part of the culture, then the taste becomes a big attraction, and it's not easy to give up. Especially the plant-based meat productions try to reproduce that taste, as we know. Okay, so pork in millions of tons. We are looking at Africa, Asia, Europe and Russia, Latin America and North America. So Asia dominates here in terms of industrial production, intermediate and backyard productions of pork. Second comes Europe and Russia, and North America is there, mostly doing it at industrial scale. There are specific issues associated with industrial versus backyard productions in terms of environmental impacts and the diet that is fed to them, because these are optimized for meat content and the methods are controversial and so on, but let's not digress into that. Bovine meat in millions of tons. Here Latin America dominates, and feedlots are a small fraction. Grassland is still large, and mixed is quite large here. Second comes Asia, and then you have North America, which is also a big beef industry. Lots of controversies associated with production of beef and pork in Latin America, because this is often directly associated with deforestation of world icons or assets like the Amazon forest. Chicken, again, Asia dominates. Broilers and layers, so you can look up what they are. They're cooked for meat or for other purposes like eggs, and backyard is not there in chicken so much, is not significant enough. And second comes Latin America and then North America. Small ruminant meat, so you have various animals which are used there. So here also Asia dominates with grassland and mixed amounting to you can look at the scale. This is up to 10 or so here, this is up to 5, this is up to 7 or so, and this is less than 1 million tons here. So this is a small fraction, but Asia still dominates here. So there are obviously social aspects of livestock production. It's not just that it's bad so we should stop. It's part of the culture, it's part of the livelihood, and it has been part of evolution of humanity over time with domesticating livestock and making a living on grazing, milk production, cheese, etc. Social aspects of livestock production then. The paper says, as mentioned, the livestock sector is an important source of income and employment for many households. In low and middle income countries in particular, livestock also provide draft power and transportation. So you can pull the plow and extract water and carry loads and so on. Bring prestige to individuals and communities. So the more livestock you own, the more rich you are seen as, or the tributary power in terms of head of tribes, head of governments and so on, small scale village level. Help to store wealth and function as insurance when the crops fail. If you have livestock, obviously there is some insurance and food security, for example. Moreover, livestock can affect social inclusiveness and equity. Backyard and small-scale production systems are important activities for poor households with limited economic opportunities. For women in developing countries, livestock are sometimes among the few productive assets they are allowed to own. They are often not allowed to own land and do farming. Hence, livestock ownership can represent a pathway toward female empowerment with potential positive implications for child nutrition, because when women do well, Human Development Index goes up, children's education and health get better. Some of these social functions of livestock are not always fully considered in the global sustainability discourse, even though they can be of great importance for the well-being of large population groups. If you just focus on carbon footprint, you always tend to miss these socioeconomic and equity gender issues. However, small-scale livestock production can also reinforce social inequalities through specific mechanisms. The risk of zoonotic diseases is often highest for the poorest livestock holders due to their close contact with animals and their limited access to healthcare services. So bovine tuberculosis had become news for some time, for example, because people keep livestock in the home to avoid theft and other things. Child labor is common for herding livestock in many rural and pastoralist communities, with negative consequences for child education and future income opportunities. These negative effects deserve attention, even though they are unlikely to outweigh the more numerous socio-economic benefits of livestock for the poor. Finally, coming closer, average greenhouse gas emissions associated with different food products. Animal source foods are shown here in blue and plant-based foods in orange. So per kilogram of product, this is average greenhouse gas emissions in kilogram of CO2 equivalent. So we convert methane and N2O to CO2 using the global warming potential. As we know, you can look up other podcasts if you know what that means. So beef obviously has the highest emissions, so we peg it to 100. Then compared to that, mutton and goat come in at around 40. Dairy herd for beef comes in at about 35 or so. Cheese, pork, poultry, eggs, and compared to that, rice, even with all its bad publicity for methane emissions from paddies, still comes in at lower than even eggs. Tofu, maize, pulses, and peas are below that. Per 100 gram of protein, so if you think about nutrition you are getting from the meat-based diet, then the average greenhouse gas emission is still highest for beef, so that's for meat. Mutton and goat come in here at 20, so this is about 48 or so. Dairy herd beef is less than 20. Then you have cheese, pork, poultry, eggs, and here rice goes up when you look at nutrition in terms of 100 grams of protein. Per 100 grams of protein, how much environmental footprint or CO2 equivalent emission there is from rice. So here methane hits you, but you still have tofu, maize, other pulses, and peas coming below that. Per kilogram of product without methane, so if you ignore the methane part, these ruminants emit plenty of methane as well. Then beef drops from 100 to 50, so large chunk of contribution comes from methane. And then you have also reductions in mutton and goat, beef for dairy, and cheese, pork, poultry, eggs, and rice drops quite a bit because most of it is from methane from paddies. There are now newer methods of growing rice reducing methane emissions or the need for flood irrigation, so I have it elsewhere in terms of how to grow rice without doing that. Basically it's about seedlings being planted after a few weeks of growth instead of from beginning. And then you have tofu, maize, and other pulses. Okay, so this gives you an idea that there are many other things discussed in the paper, by the way. You should go and read if you want, but the idea is here to take a look at meat-based diets' environmental impacts with other factors in mind rather than just land use and greenhouse gas emissions. Then you may end up with choices that are more equitable, just, and help livelihoods of the poor and provide maybe women empowerment, etc. as well. Eventually maybe it has to be eliminated, but maybe carbon capture methods will come along that will make it viable to have some level of meat diet to meet nutrition requirements without consuming so much that health gets affected and so on. So let's leave it at this point. Okay.